President Donald Trump has come out linking Tylenol to autism. But what really causes autism? Is it written into our DNA before we're even born? Or is something in the world around us quietly shaping the way the brain develops? For decades, scientists, parents, and politicians have searched for that single, definitive answer. And yet, despite billions of dollars in research, despite thousands of studies, the truth remains more complex and far more fascinating than most people realize. Autism isn't just a medical condition. It's a word that has carried mystery, stigma, fear, and hope. You've probably seen headlines screaming about an autism epidemic or heard heated arguments about vaccines, diet, chemicals, or even everyday medications. Some claims are sensational, others are downright misleading. But here's the thing. The real story of autism's causes is both more surprising and more human than any one headline could ever capture. Think about it. Why does autism appear in some families but not others? Why does it sometimes show up in identical twins but not always in both? Why do some studies point to environmental factors while others find strong genetic links? The puzzle pieces are everywhere, scattered across genetics labs, public health studies, and even political press conferences. And the stakes couldn't be higher. Understanding autism's causes doesn't just matter for science. It matters for millions of families around the world. It matters for how we talk about autism, how we support autistic people, and how we separate fact from fiction in a world full of noise. So here's our mission today: to dive into the science of autism's origins. We'll explore what we actually know, what remains uncertain, and why so many myths still cling to this condition. Along the way, we'll confront the claims that dominate headlines, including a recent statement by President Donald Trump linking Tylenol to autism. Is there any truth to it? Or is it just another distraction from what research really shows? Stick till the end to find out. Autism spectrum disorder, often shortened to ASD, is not a mystery illness hiding in the shadows. It's a neurodevelopmental condition, meaning it begins in the early stages of brain development and affects how a person communicates, interacts, and processes the world around them. Some people on the spectrum speak fluently, others may not speak at all. Some thrive in structured environments, while others flourish in creativity and independence. That's why it's called a spectrum, because no two autistic people are exactly alike. Now here's what we know for sure. Autism is not rare. In fact, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, about 1 in 36 children in the United States are now identified as being on the spectrum. Boys are diagnosed roughly 4 times more often than girls, though researchers are learning that autism in girls is often overlooked or misdiagnosed. Another fact, autism has been around for as long as humans have, but it hasn't always been recognized. The steep rise in diagnoses over the past few decades doesn't necessarily mean that autism itself is skyrocketing. Instead, it reflects better awareness, improved screening tools, broader diagnostic criteria, and a willingness to talk about it more openly. What might have been missed or misclassified in the past is now being identified earlier and more accurately. So if autism isn't new, and it isn't caused by bad parenting or sudden modern inventions, what is shaping it? The evidence points strongly toward biology, and that brings us to genetics and environmental factors, 2 parts of the puzzle that work together in complex ways. But before we dig into that, let's pause and clear something up. Autism is not a disease that someone catches. It's not the result of a single action or mistake. It is part of human neurodiversity, deeply rooted in brain development, and influenced by both our genes and our surroundings. That's the foundation. And once we understand the basics, we can move on to the deeper questions. Just how much of autism is inherited through DNA, and how much is shaped by the environment we grow up in? When it comes to autism, one of the clearest and most consistent findings is this: Genetics play a powerful role. If you've ever wondered why autism seems to run in some families, science has an answer. Studies of twins reveal that if one identical twin is diagnosed with autism, the other has a very high chance of being on the spectrum too, much higher than in fraternal twins or siblings. This tells us that DNA, the biological blueprint written into every cell, is a major driver. Researchers estimate that anywhere from 60 to 90% of autism risk comes from genetic factors. But here's where it gets interesting. There isn't just one autism gene. Instead, scientists have uncovered hundreds of genetic variations that can contribute. Some are common and only nudge the risk slightly, while others are rare mutations that can have a much bigger impact. In some cases, these variations are inherited from parents. In others, they're what's called de novo mutations, changes that appear spontaneously in a child's DNA, even though neither parent carries them. These mutations often affect genes involved in brain development, neural signaling, and synapse formation, the very processes that shape how the brain communicates within itself and with the outside world. But genetics doesn't tell the whole story. Many people carry these variations and never develop autism. Others have no obvious genetic mutations, yet are still diagnosed. This is why scientists describe genes as setting the stage. They create a landscape of vulnerability or resilience, but the final outcome may depend on what interacts with those genes during development. Think of it like a loaded deck of cards. Genes may deal some of those cards at birth, but the environment, everything from prenatal conditions to early life experiences, decides how the game is played. In other words, genes are powerful, but they are not destiny. So, while the search for autism's genetic roots has revealed enormous complexity, it has also made one thing clear. Autism is not the result of bad parenting, poor lifestyle choices, or a single harmful exposure. It is deeply biological, wired into the brain through the intricate language of DNA. And yet, if genes explain so much, why do identical twins sometimes have different outcomes? Why does one child in a family develop autism while their sibling does not? The answer lies in what comes next: the environment and its subtle but important influence on neurodevelopment. If genes set the stage for autism, then the environment helps decide how the play unfolds. Scientists have spent decades looking at what happens during pregnancy and early life, searching for patterns that might explain why autism appears in some children but not in others. And while no single environmental factor has been proven to cause autism on its own, several have emerged as possible contributors. One area of focus is maternal health during pregnancy. Studies suggest that high fevers, certain infections, or metabolic conditions like obesity and diabetes may slightly increase the risk. These aren't guarantees, but they point to the idea that the mother's overall health and immune system activity can shape how the developing brain forms. Another factor under the microscope is air pollution. Research has found that mothers who live in areas with heavy traffic or high levels of particulate matter may face a modestly higher chance of having a child on the spectrum. Pollutants like nitrogen dioxide and fine airborne particles can cross into the bloodstream, and some scientists believe they may interfere with fetal brain development. Chemicals and toxins are also part of the investigation. Substances such as pesticides, phthalates in plastics, and certain heavy metals have been studied, but the evidence remains mixed and often inconsistent. It's difficult to separate genuine risk from coincidence because people are exposed to countless substances in daily life, and teasing out which ones truly matter requires massive, carefully controlled studies. Nutrition plays a role as well. For example, folic acid supplementation before and during early pregnancy appears to reduce the risk of neural developmental disorders, including autism. On the flip side, deficiencies in key vitamins like vitamin D may increase vulnerability. These findings highlight how something as basic as diet can interact with genetics to influence outcomes. But here's the most important point. Association is not the same as causation. Just because a certain factor shows up more often in mothers of autistic children doesn't mean it directly caused the autism. There could be hidden confounders, genetic predispositions, lifestyle factors, or social conditions that muddy the picture. The current consensus among experts is that environmental influences probably account for a smaller share of autism risk than genetics, but they still matter. They may act like sparks, landing on already primed tinder, shifting the odds just enough to make a difference in some cases. So where does this leave us? Genes load the dice, and the environment nudges the roll. Autism emerges not from one dramatic cause, but from a delicate and often unpredictable interaction between biology and the world we live in. And that's why the next part of our story is just as important. Sorting fact from fiction when it comes to popular but misleading explanations. Whenever science leaves room for uncertainty, myths rush in to fill the gap. Autism is no exception. For decades, explanations have been offered that sound convincing on the surface but collapse under the weight of evidence. Let's break down some of the biggest ones. The most infamous myth is the vaccine autism scare. In 1998, a paper in The Lancet claimed a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. The study was later retracted, its lead author exposed for fraud, and dozens of large-scale studies have since confirmed the same conclusion. Vaccines do not cause autism. Yet this myth refuses to die, spreading fear and leading to dangerous drops in vaccination rates worldwide. The scientific verdict couldn't be clearer, but the damage from misinformation still lingers. Another outdated idea is the refrigerator mother theory. In the mid-20th century, some psychiatrists suggested that autism was caused by cold, unloving parenting. Imagine the harm this inflicted. Parents, already struggling to understand their child's needs, were blamed as the very cause. Modern research has fully debunked this. Autism is not the result of parenting style. It is a biological condition rooted in brain development, not in how much affection a parent gives. Then there are the detox myths, claims that autism is caused by mysterious toxins that can be flushed out with extreme diets, supplements, or dangerous cures. From bleach-based treatments to restrictive eating regimens, these so-called solutions are not only unsupported by science, but often harmful. Autism cannot be detoxed away, and preying on desperate families with false hope is one of the most troubling parts of this misinformation landscape. Some theories blame single chemicals or exposures, painting autism as the direct result of one villainous substance: gluten, casein, mercury, even Wi-Fi signals. But autism is far too complex for such simplistic answers. While certain environmental factors are being studied, no credible evidence has singled out one everyday product or exposure as the cause. So why do these myths survive? Because simple answers are tempting. They offer certainty where science offers complexity. They give people someone or something to blame. But believing these myths distracts from what truly matters: supporting autistic people, funding real research, and separating fact from fear. The bottom line: autism is not caused by vaccines, bad parenting, or quick-fix toxins. These explanations have been tested, and they've failed. The truth is harder, more nuanced, and far more fascinating. And it lies in the ongoing interplay between genetics, biology, and environment. And as we move forward, science continues to explore new frontiers that may bring us closer to understanding this puzzle. Even with decades of research, autism remains one of the most complex conditions scientists have ever studied. We know genetics matter, we know the environment matters, but there are still enormous gaps in our understanding. That's why researchers are now pushing into new frontiers, areas that could reveal not just what causes autism, but how it develops in the brain. One of the most exciting areas is epigenetics. Think of your DNA as a library filled with thousands of books. Epigenetics doesn't change the words in those books, but it does decide which ones get opened and read. Environmental factors like stress, diet, or chemical exposure can influence these on-off switches. Some scientists believe that epigenetic changes during pregnancy or early life may help explain why children with the same genetic predispositions can have very different outcomes. Another frontier is the use of multiomics, the integration of genetics, transcriptomics, metabolomics, and even the microbiome. Instead of looking at DNA in isolation, researchers are layering multiple levels of biological data to see how systems interact. This holistic approach could reveal hidden pathways that single gene studies miss. Then there's the brain itself. Neuroimaging has given us incredible windows into how autistic brains are wired. Advanced MRI and connectivity studies suggest that autism may not be about one broken brain region, but about networks, how different parts of the brain talk to each other. Some connections may be stronger, others weaker, creating patterns that shape perception, communication, and behavior. Another crucial development is the realization that autism is not one condition. It's many. Some researchers are now working to identify distinct subtypes of autism, each with its own biological fingerprint. This could explain why autism looks so different from person to person, and why one-size-fits-all explanations fall apart. But with every step forward, big questions remain. Why do some children with strong genetic risk never develop autism, while others with little genetic vulnerability do? How do dozens of small factors combine into one big outcome? And perhaps the most pressing question, how can this knowledge improve the lives of autistic people, not just in theory, but in practice? The truth is, science isn't looking for a single villain anymore. It's mapping a web of genes, environments, and developmental processes. Each discovery adds another thread, and slowly, the picture becomes clearer. What we do know is that the answer will not be simple. Autism's causes are as varied as the people who live with it. And that complexity is exactly why sweeping claims, like blaming a single vaccine, chemical, or medication, don't hold up. But as we'll see next, those kinds of claims still make headlines, and one of the most recent comes from Donald Trump himself. In September 2025, President Donald Trump made headlines with a bold statement. He claimed that prenatal use of Tylenol, also known as acetaminophen, may be linked to autism. He went even further, saying that warning labels should be placed on bottles to alert pregnant women. It wasn't the first time Trump spoke about autism. For years, he has hinted at vaccines playing a role, despite overwhelming evidence proving otherwise. But this time, the target was one of the most common medications in the world, used by millions of pregnant women to treat fever and pain. So what does the science actually say? The idea that acetaminophen could affect fetal brain development isn't completely new. Some early observational studies suggested a weak association between frequent use of the drug during pregnancy and later neurodevelopmental differences, including autism and ADHD. These studies raised eyebrows, but also had major limitations. They relied heavily on self-reported medication use and struggled to rule out confounding factors, like the fact that women who took Tylenol were often treating fevers or illnesses that themselves could influence pregnancy outcomes. More recent and rigorous research has painted a clearer picture. A massive Swedish study in 2024 looked at more than 2 million children and found no significant increase in autism risk when controlling for family history, maternal health, and other confounders. Other large-scale analyses have echoed the same conclusion. There's no solid evidence that Tylenol directly causes autism. Medical organizations were quick to respond to Trump's claim. Groups like the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Autism Science Foundation all stressed the same point. There is no proven causal link between Tylenol and autism. Experts also warned that spreading fear could have real-world consequences. Imagine pregnant women avoiding treatment for high fever or severe pain because of misinformation. Untreated fever itself has been linked to pregnancy complications, which means avoiding Tylenol could cause more harm than good. Of course, science doesn't close the door completely. Researchers are still investigating the long-term effects of common medications during pregnancy. But right now, the evidence against Tylenol is weak, inconsistent, and not enough to justify sweeping claims or public warnings. So why did Trump make this statement? Some see it as political theater, others as a way to stir controversy in an election year. What's clear is that his claim is not backed by the weight of scientific evidence. The lesson here is bigger than the president's comment. It's a reminder of how easily complex science can be reduced to a soundbite, how quickly fear can spread, and why it's so important to look at credible research before drawing conclusions. Autism is complicated, and reducing it to a single over-the-counter medication oversimplifies what is, in reality, one of the most intricate puzzles in modern medicine. So after all the science, the debates, the myths, and the headlines, where does that leave us? What can we actually say about the causes of autism? Here's the truth. Autism is not caused by a single thing. It's not the result of vaccines. It's not the result of bad parenting. And it's not something you can pin entirely on one chemical, one pill, or one moment in pregnancy. The best evidence shows that autism arises from a complex mix of factors, strong genetic foundations shaped and influenced by environmental conditions during development. Genes load the dice, and the environment gives them a push, but no one factor tells the whole story. That complexity can feel frustrating, but it's also empowering. It means we're not dealing with a dead end. We're dealing with a frontier of science that's still unfolding. Every year, researchers discover more about how the brain develops, how genes and environment interact, and how we can better understand not just autism's risks, but autism's strengths. And here's another truth. Misinformation is loud. Myths about vaccines, miracle cures, or Tylenol make headlines, but they rarely hold up under scrutiny. When leaders, celebrities, or social media personalities make sweeping claims, it's tempting to latch onto them. But real answers come from careful, peer-reviewed research, not from soundbites. So what should you take away? That autism is deeply human. It's part of our neurodiversity, not a mistake to be blamed on a single factor. That science is ongoing. And while we don't have all the answers, we know far more today than we did 20 years ago. And that separating fact from fiction isn't just about science. It's about supporting autistic people and their families with understanding, respect, and truth. If you found this video helpful, share it with someone who might be struggling to make sense of all the noise. Hit the like button, subscribe for more deep dives into complex topics, and check the description for links to reputable sources and further reading. The conversation about autism is far from over, and the more we learn, the closer we get to real clarity. Until then, stay curious, stay critical, and most importantly, stay informed.